I've had this idea in my head for a long time that realistic games are generally not very fun, but fun games are generally not very realistic. Every game I've seen that tries too hard to be realistic ends up being kind of boring or not really that interesting to mess around with. It loses a lot of the factors that I believe make any game entertaining. Obviously, fun is subjective to a certain degree, but there are very specific concepts that often end up contributing to that fun factor, regardless of what type of game it is. The most core part of any game is the player feedback loop. The player provides input and the game returns the response. If I do something in any game, I expect there to be some kind of consequence or effect to it. This is directly related to immersion. If there are any breaks in this loop, even for stupid things that most people won't try, that is a small crack in the game's immersion. It doesn't even have to be the expected response, or the obvious, like, does the shrub burn if I try to light it on fire? It can be simple, like, does the bird do something if I get too close? What happens to me if I try to go into a restricted area? What if I throw a grenade into the toilet? Doesn't matter what it is, or even what the response from the game is. The biggest killer of immersion is when there's little to no response at all. And without any sense of immersion in the game's web of rules, the system, the whole thing, it can be quite difficult to enjoy it as an experience. Player freedom is the second most important part of a game. Now, obviously, a game can't let players do anything, because that would be impossible, but it should allow freedom within the box of the game itself. The game Barotrauma fails this part spectacularly with every update. In that game, you pick a class, get dropped into a submarine, and you have to do jobs while fighting off monsters and preventing your sub from being destroyed, and your crew from being eaten alive. There is a lot that can go wrong, but there used to be a lot of ways to make things work in your favor. For example, Barotrauma has a sort of electrical engineering system, so you can make custom electrical systems in your sub if you so choose. It's really complicated, I don't care for it, but it's there. One thing that people figured out how to do was automate the reactor, which powers the entire submarine. Normally, you have to babysit the stupid thing and change out fuel rods on a regular basis, because putting more than one in causes it to overheat. Some smarty pants use the electrical system to automate the on-off cycle so that it could hold multiple rods without overheating. You want to guess what the developers did? They patched it out so it no longer works. This was the first thing they did that I felt was completely against the player freedom that they had created to begin with. Over time, they've clamped down harder and tried to make it so that there's only one right way to play, which is not at all what the game itself used to be. It used to be, here's a sub, good luck, don't get eaten. Now it's just heading toward strictly enforced roleplay, which I view as like the antithesis of a fun game. I don't like where it's going at any rate. Long-term progression is the last pillar of important factors in games, especially these days. When you play a game, there has to be some kind of point, whether it's made up by you or imposed by the game itself. If there's nothing to try and accomplish, then there's no reason for the game to exist in the first place. Early video games had very simple points. Think Pac-Man. Eat all the orbs without being munched on by a ghost. Really straightforward. Because the levels don't change, you can formulate strategies and learn how to best approach each level, which is a more abstract form of long-term progression. Newer games allow much more concrete versions of this progression. Skill trees, experience points, material hoarding, base building, tech research, all manner of things that count as long-term progression. I guarantee basically every game you can think of right now has some form of goal imposed on you when you play. In Minecraft, here we go, use Minecraft again. The point is to survive. If you boot up a regular world, you're immediately put on a time limit until monsters start spawning, and you need somewhere to stay or some way to defend yourself. That's an implicit goal imposed by the systems within the game. If you don't do anything, you will probably be murdered or you'll starve. In more linear modern games, you're told exactly what to do and where, which are more explicit goals. Go here, do this thing, collect X amount of whatever, who cares? If there's nothing to do and nothing to work towards, it's not really a game. With these three factors, feedback, freedom, and progression, any game can technically be fun, regardless of what it actually is. Games that can nail any of these elements are games that people really enjoy. Minecraft does player freedom extremely well. Half-Life 2 does player feedback really well with the environments. And plenty of roguelikes and incremental games take long-term progression to the literal extremes, which has its own type of appeal. You may be wondering, how exactly does this relate to the idea of fun versus realism? To that I say, let's walk through a bit of a thought experiment. Everybody knows Minecraft at this point, so I'll use that as my example. Imagine that Minecraft, or Mojang, or Microsoft, or whoever runs the game, I don't really care. Imagine that those people started to put out updates to be more realistic. Instead of being able to hold and place multiple blocks yourself, you needed to pick up each block and put them down one at a time. You can't carry hundreds of cobblestone to build your little hut. You need to carry each cobblestone block one at a time out of a hole in the ground and place it to build your house. Sounds really painful, doesn't it? That's more realistic, so why would anybody hate it? Because it exists directly at odds with player freedom. Who on earth wants to carry hundreds of blocks one at a time, spending hours of their life, potentially, doing some tedious task just to build a small house in a block game? That's really easy, nobody does. Life can be tedious enough, there's absolutely no desire to play a game that is senselessly tedious. What if the feedback loop was more realistic? Instead of getting wood when you punch a tree, you just hurt yourself. Nothing happens to the tree, and you're left to pick up little rocks and bits of dirt with your hands, because that's all you can do. Your inputs would be largely meaningless, and there would be very little point to playing. How about long-term progression? That's even worse. How about you slow the game down so that everything goes at the same speed as real life? Building your house takes at least a year of work. You gotta wait years for the trees to grow back, and you'll probably die of old age before anything interesting happens. This thought experiment about a realistic Minecraft probably sounds extremely absurd, but that's because it is. Games sacrifice realism all the time, even when pretending to be realistic. Nobody actually wants to play a super realistic game. They just want something that feels real enough to be a living, breathing system. How can you build something that feels real without realism? That's the heart of the issue, but it's not actually that difficult to do. Say my early example with throwing a grenade into a toilet were to be part of a game, but that game has no physics engine or destructible environment elements. It's super limited, so the toilet can't break, it can't fall into pieces, it can't do anything, can't really do anything. How do you acknowledge my input in a reasonable fashion? I, personally, would make it so that the explosion is contained and it blasts water everywhere in an exaggerated spray. So it would have a unique series of effects and animations to it. Could be very simple even, but it doesn't matter so long as my choice is acknowledged by the system. This game is too technically limited to be realistic, but it still feels good because it gave me a response to my silly input of trying to explode the toilet. maybe all the developers do is reuse the default water explosion for the inside of the toilet, which would be a lot better than no changes at all. Use the water explosion, shake the toilet for a few seconds, and bam, you're golden. It doesn't have to be realistic at all, just has to complete the player feedback loop. And like I said, if the feedback loop is completed more often than not, you have an immersive game. You can even go a step further in absurdity. Let's say that this hypothetical game is completely deranged. If I toss a grenade into the toilet, imagine that instead of nothing, the toilet spits it back out at me and calls me a dumbass. I get blown up by my own grenade and the toilet mocks my death. That's completely insane, but it's still a complete feedback loop. If the entire game was filled with nonsense absurdity like that, then you have yourself a nonsense absurd world that people can immerse themselves in. The immersion doesn't come from realism at all. It comes from the acknowledgement of the player's actions. A nonsense, insane world that reacts whenever the player does something is going to be way more immersive and fun than a realistic world that doesn't respond much at all. That is a fact, and there's no way around it. Barotrauma is my example of a game that chases realism and stops being fun, but I also have an example of a game that tossed realism aside and became more fun because of it. I've been playing a lot of 7 Days to Die. That's like a zombie survival crafting base building thing. I played it a number of years ago when it was like Alpha 18 or something, and at that point it was just a fun game engine to mess with. I didn't consider the main part of the game to be very fun at all, because it was simply too mundane given the potential that it had. Recently, I saw that it had been getting regular updates again years later. And so, my curiosity got the best of me one night and I tried it again. The game itself is way more fun than it used to be. There are a couple of major reasons for this. It now has a perk system that provides game-changing bonuses to items and to me. There's a stun baton in the game that can charge after a number of hits, and when it's charged, the next attack zaps whatever you hit it and basically stuns it, makes it just twitch for a little bit. It's a crowd control weapon, basically. There is an expensive perk that allows this baton to be charged all the time, and there's a modifier that adds a ton of knockback to the charged attacks. Put together, every hit with this baton zaps the zombie and sends them flying like 20 or 30 feet back. It is highly absurd, but it is also highly satisfying because it hits all three pillars at once. It is a long-term progression goal to reach that ability. I am allowed the freedom to combine those elements together and have it actually work, and it acknowledges my input with a highly dramatic response that validates my effort to obtain it. Sometimes the zombies' heads or limbs fly off, and if I shoot them while they're on the ground, the effect ends prematurely to let me know they're down for good. I can zap them, then pull out my weapon of choice to take advantage of the stun effect. It's a really excellent example of a system that is not realistic, but is still really engaging because of how responsive it is to me. There's a number of perks now in the game that make it a lot more fun. It's not just perks, but that's the easiest example to use. The game is more responsive overall. The thing that modern games fail to understand is that nobody really cares about how good the graphics look. They just want a world that responds to them when they interact with it. Minecraft is popular because it's easy to understand and highly responsive. And nobody cares that the textures are 16 by 16 pixels, or it's all blocks and square shapes. They care that the game lets them be free, and rewards them for that freedom. Its stylistic charm helps, but it wouldn't sustain players without the freedom or the feedback. The scale or look of a world is meaningless if it doesn't react to you. If nothing reacts to you and your actions don't change anything, then it's not really a game. It's just a tech demo or an art piece in disguise. Some games are more linear than others, of course, but the basic principles stay the same. If there's no goal, there's no point. If there's no feedback, there's no game. And if there's no freedom, there's no real fun to be had.